Today I wanted to talk a little bit about landscape art and how I think that it's important. It's an important art form, and I don't think a lot of people are really talking about it too much. I'm currently getting ready to go to the Representational Art Conference in Ventura, California, and I'm anticipating there being a lot of sort of academic studio painters, figurative painters there that paint in a very tight fashion or more of a traditional or academic style. And I have no problem with art of that nature. My wife painted in that way. Her trompe-l'oeil paintings were very realistic, and I love them. They're beautiful. So it's not about one art form against another, but I think it's about just allowing the full spectrum of art to have a place in modern art movement. I was thinking about why landscape kind of gets glossed over a little bit in some circles, and I wanted to make a series of videos that address that issue. Now, I've often said that in the communication revolution, those who communicate best prevail. So we want to hold our own as landscape painters. We don't want to dominate the art scene. I don't feel there's any need for one art form to prevail over another. I think they should all coexist and enliven each other and inform each other and energize each other and challenge each other in a lot of ways. So the way that society moves forward is synthesizing a lot of different ideas. If one idea becomes too prevalent, the synthesis becomes inhibited and there's no growth in that culture. So I feel that there's a lot to explore in landscape. There's a lot to discover in the future here. So I think it's a viable art form that needs to be fostered. So behind me is a painting I recently did, and I feel like it really embodies a lot of the really beautiful things I'm trying to do in my art project. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about it and explain it a little bit. In the course of doing this, I hope to discover and bring up to the surface some of my subconscious motivations. And I think that will be of use and of interest to collectors. I think collectors do want to know why your art is interesting and important. Why shouldn't they? I mean, why shouldn't we as artists be willing at least to attempt to bridge that gap? A lot of artists feel reluctant to talk about their art because it is a subconscious process, and I feel that they feel like they're going to sort of puncture the mystery of it, and I understand that, and certainly I understand why artists would want to keep things a mystery. But at the same time, I feel like the onus is on us, to try to help people understand why our art is important. I think, if you just look at a piece of art long enough, I think you will understand why it's important. But unfortunately, in today's world, collectors, people passing through a gallery, they don't often, give themselves that luxury. And so, by explaining and trying to understand why our art is interesting and important, I think we help people slow down, and really that's what I'm trying to do as an artist, is have people slow down, look at the landscape, look at my paintings, my interpretation of the landscape, and understand why this moment in time is important. To just pause, take a deep breath, and just meditate on this scene. There are a lot of ways that I use, to help direct the eye through a composition. There are a lot of tools in the artist's toolkit that he or she uses to help the viewer absorb a scene in a different way. So that's, I think, one of the primary reasons that landscape is important, is that it helps the viewer see through a different lens. So that lens can be sort of transformative of how you see nature, how you see the environment, how you see the world around you. And so every time you look at a painting, you're seen through that lens, and you're experiencing the world in a new way. So that's why landscape can be very exciting. That's why it can be very stimulating to those who collect this art form. Artists are like a lot of professionals. We use, our own vocabulary, and that can be sort of intimidating. I think as artists, we need to strip away that jargon and try to explain our work in a way that's straightforward and honest and authentic. And so when I say composition, that can be a lot of different things. But in this case, what I simply mean is a composition, just like you think a composition in a symphony. So, a composition, the symphonic composition has, flutes, oboes, bass, violin, viola, so on. And we, you combine everything, all the musical tonality, the rhythms and everything, all that makes the composition, correct? So the analog is pretty good between music and landscape painting. One of the things I like to do in composition is to lead the eye through a painting. So you can think of the painting as a kind of visual journey through that scene. This particular painting is based on a plein air sketch, and you can see, there's some similarities between this and the final piece. But I've made, critical changes throughout to enhance the composition. Just glancing at it really quick, I can see these shapes here are very similar in size, and probably they were. When I was out in the field, I probably saw them as relative to the same, and I've changed that. You can see that this has a larger shape. This is the secondary shape and the third reed. So the artist, observes the world and then sort of transforms it into a way that's going to present the new viewer, the collector, with a new journey. So, I saw this scene, I loved it. I go out, drive around, and I'll see things, and I'm just overwhelmed with the beauty of a certain scene. And often I don't fully understand why. It's usually a combination of things, the light, that particular moment. So I try to capture that in a plein air sketch. And then I sort of restructure it in this new composition. So one of the things I wanted to do was have this be a dark shape as if it were in shadow, perhaps under the shadow of a cloud, or maybe there's a tree over here that's huge cottonwood or something that's casting this huge, massive shadow across the landscape. So this shadow holds the viewer's eye into that scene as we experience these repetition of arcs through the two-dimensional space. So, and then there's kind of tranquil areas that are sort of restful for the eye. The eye can sort of set in that space. But the arcs, and you'll see that this field here, it gets darker on the edge. The darkness on this edge creates kind of a spot where the eye can rise up again and through the composition. So you have a circular journey through this space, and it can create a lot of energy. So when you look at it, you're energized by the motion of those strokes. It's a very subtle thing, it's a subconscious thing, and I find, my wife and I, we've collected a very nice assortment of paintings, mostly of people we've known and traded with. But we find, the best art that we really love, we can come back to it again and again. In fact, we have paintings in our living room that have been hanging there for years, and we just love looking at it. And there's a regeneration, a renewal of our appreciation of that artist's perspective of nature. And I think that's, at its best, that's what landscape can do for the viewer, for the collector, is it can give you that perpetual journey through that space. So, that sounds maybe a little, I'm grappling with, difficult ideas. And it's not always easy for artists to articulate, the reason that we do what we do. But I think it's critical in order to connect with a larger audience, especially in a time when many art forms, I mean, they have a sort of a prepackaged story that goes along with their art. It may it's almost like they're illustrations of a particular political moment or illustrations of a particular movement or something like that. I mean, and they have the advantage that those art forms are very easy to communicate, why the artist did them. So, landscape artists are at a disadvantage because our art form is so poetic that it's hard to form, concrete notion of why our artwork is important. I remain firm, despite the fact that many artists are probably going to say, it's poetry. We can't, deconstruct it and make it, concrete or too prosaic. And I get that. I understand that it has to remain in its realm. But I think we can sort of reach out and start connecting and communicating with collectors. And I think the appreciation will grow for the art form of landscape. I do think landscape has an amazing future, and I'm all in, and I want to see it expand and grow and be an art form that's more appreciated. Right now, it doesn't seem like there's a huge opening in a lot of art organizations for the sort of I almost call it neo-impressionism, but obviously that was already used. We kind of probably need a new name for this school of art that's emerging, where, for example, in my work, I use a lot of field effects, and I borrowed that from abstract expressionism. So we're synthesizing new forms. I mean, that's also a thing that the Impressionists did as well. But I mean, the field effects, have been pushed even further than the Impressionists, the French Impressionists were doing. So, to achieve a greater vibrancy, a greater saturation of color, and I think it's very exciting, yet within a very realist tradition. So, there's a lot of synthesis going on, and I think it's very exciting. So, I'm going to make a series of these videos, and today I guess what we've talked about is composition. At least we've gotten our feet wet a little bit on what the compositional idea is, and that is it's a holistic idea. It's where you're trying to get everything right in your painting. The lines, the rhythm, the color, the value, saturation, all these things into a harmonious whole. So composition is about all of those elements, the rhythm. I think there is the possibility that when we do that, when we talk about these elements in isolation, we sort of gives the impression that that's all that painting is about, or you can sort of dissect it into these components. All I'm trying to do in this is to reach greater understanding, more clarity, and I think that's all good. Here are the 3 palette knives that I use. It's an RGM 31 in the middle, and then 2 Holbein palette knives on the sides. The reason I use these 3 different palette knives is because they give a very distinctive mark. The 2 Holbein palette knives are very flexible. The ginkgo-shaped palette knife is less flexible, but as it wears, it gets a little thinner and it does get a little bit more flexible. But the ginkgo-shaped palette knife is excellent for blending. You can see, you can just skim it across and just smooth out an edge or soften a passage. This thinner palette knife is good for very narrow marks, and like that one there, that's a very thin mark. It has a nice attack, a very thin attack, and the round one is smoother. Here's the final piece.